Hey guys, today I'll show you how I make a hand-cut, hand-stamped keychain. Now for a project like this, I need to make a pattern, and I start by drawing the shape that I want to cut. Then I clean it up and digitize it. And then from there I can add it to a document and shrink the shape to the size that I want it. And then I'll cut out as many of the pattern as I need. So for this project I cut out 2. I always like to do an extra because I mess things up. So I go ahead and I use some rubber cement to attach that to the metal. Here I'm using 18 gauge aluminum. So if I am doing something that has a lot more detail to it, I'll first put the rubber cement onto the metal and then onto the paper so that it's tacky on both sides, and that helps the little details of the paper not to lift up, but I didn't need to do that this time because it's just not so detailed. And then for this, I use a small jeweler's saw blade. This is a jeweler's saw here. This is a new concept. I think it has a 5-inch throat. And I'm just checking to make sure here that I've got the saw blade in nice and tight. I need to have the right tension in order to be able to cut so that I don't snap the blades. So I'm going to go ahead and use some jeweler's lube here, and that helps my blade to glide through the metal. And then I'm just going to get started cutting. I'm being careful here as I go around the curves and corners. The dust from the aluminum will tend to build up and get in the way of my line so that I can't see where to cut. So it's kind of like tracing with a blade, right? But that dust builds up, so then I just brush it away with that little brush. I used to blow it away with my mouth, but I have started having a reaction to the aluminum. So now I always wear a respiratory mask when I'm cutting. And I normally have a vacuum running to pick up the dust that I brush away, but it made it tough to see what I was doing to have that nozzle for the vacuum here, so I'm not using it for the video. When you're doing little corners like this here, you need to rest the back of the blade against your work instead of cutting forward. So you just make tiny, quick little movements at the corner while you're pulling your blade back just a tiny bit so that you're not cutting into the shape that you're trying to make. This is of course double speed. I wish I was this fast, but I am not. So for this part, I'm just kind of backtracking and trying to make this little guy's eyes here. This shape is actually a rubber ducky isopod. So you've probably heard of, or probably picked up, pill bugs in your yard. And this is just one of those. So pill bugs are actually a crustacean, and they're called an isopod. And there are all kinds of varieties. There are over 50,000 that have been classified already. This is one that's unclassified so far. So it was found in a cave in Thailand, and it's really popular, really expensive, really hard to get. So I'm making this little keychain for people who wish they could have rubber duckies. So I'm just coming to the end here, and I like to slow down just a little bit when I come to the end so that I don't send pieces flying. And I'm just taking the metal off of my blade there and peeling back the pattern and then the protective coating that's on the metal to take a look at it, the big reveal. And I didn't like it. You can't tell what it is. It looks like a poop. So I decided to try again. So again, lubing the blade and starting to cut. So this time I decided that in order to make it look more like an isopod, I needed to go ahead and give some more definition to each of these little plates here. Plates are, it's not the technical term, but we don't mind. So as I go, I'm just going to go ahead and cut down into the little plate and then back up my blade and come around the curve of the next one. Down around his little bum. Now I tried to go ahead and cut into the curves again here, into the plates at the bottom, but the angle was kind of funny, which it's doable, but I just didn't want to. So after I tried a couple of them, I decided to go ahead and just come back and finish up those parts afterwards. So just cutting the outside outline there, and then I'll come back in for the details when I finish. Just finishing up our little guy's head there. You'll have to Google these little guys, rubber ducky isopods, when you're done watching this video, and check out some pictures. They're the most adorable things. Their little front there actually looks like a beak on a rubber ducky that you'd play with in the bathtub. They're just cute. All right, so that's finished. And I'm just going back in now to cut those details. Obviously I can't cut all the way across because it'll come apart, and I'm trying to leave enough space to do my stamping, but to give it enough detail so that you can really see what it is. You could see the paper lift a little bit right at the end there, and that's why I usually like to use rubber cement on the metal and on the paper. All right, so now just cutting the eyes. I didn't really like the way that the eyes turned out on the last one either, so I'm rethinking the shape on this. And it'll be just a little bit different, almost done here. There we go. All right, let's reveal again, just peeling off the paper and the backing. That is much more like an isopod. So now it's time to get to stamping. So I'm just going to use some electrical tape to go ahead and stick my little rubber ducky to my bench here, to my bench block. And then what I like to do when I get started is to go ahead and write out the phrase that I'm going to be using to stamp, and then that way I can count out how many letters I've got and figure out where the center is, and then center that onto my blank. So center the phrase there, and I'm going to go ahead and mark the center of my blank there as well. So if you're new to my channel, just know that I like using electrical tape as a guide when I'm stamping, so I can just put it on my blank. It really holds it nice and stable on my bench block, and then I'm able to slide my stamps up against the edge of it. And since it's a little bit thicker than other kinds of tape, it helps me to get a nice feel for the edge of the tape when my stamp hits it and get a nice clean line. Now I still like to rest my pinky against the bench block, and that helps me to have a little bit more stability with my stamp. Then I can give it as much force as I need when I am hitting my stamp with my hammer. Now when I'm doing a letter with a descender, like a Y or a G, I just try to line it up over the tape and just let that descender hang down onto the tape. And it'll leave a little bit of the tape behind under that descender, but you can clean it up later. and it'll help you to be able to keep things lined up the way they need to be without one of those crazy floating letters that you see sometimes. So now when I am ready to start the second row, I just go ahead and pick up my tape and move it down. Usually I like to flip the tape to use the other side because the other side will be clean, whereas the side that I used before will have some nicks in it from the stamps. Now you may have noticed that my bench block is not bare. It has something on it there. I like to use duct tape on my bench block. Sometimes you'll see hand stamped pieces where the back is all scratched up and people tell you, oh yeah, that's just how you know it's handmade, is from the scratches on the back, but I think it looks pretty unprofessional. And so if you put down some duct tape or some electrical tape or a few layers of masking tape, just enough to give it a tiny bit of cushion behind your piece, that will keep it from getting marked up. And that displaced metal has a place to go down into the duct tape instead of trying to smash up against the bench block. So I've gone ahead and filled this in with my ink pen, and then I'm cleaning it away, but accidentally got a little bit carried away and took a little bit too much of the ink out of the impressions. So I'm going to grab my pen again here. And this is actually a Sharpie oil-based paint pen. It's my favorite. I prefer it over a regular Sharpie just because I feel like it gets a darker ink, a darker darkening. So I also just use rubbing alcohol then as a solvent to clean up the extra ink that has gone onto the blank. And it does a good job usually of going ahead and leaving the ink in the impressions, and it cleans it up really well without changing the texture of the piece. You can see how it's bowed a bit, so I'm using a nylon hammer to just go ahead and flatten that back out. Nylon instead of metal because I don't want to change the texture of the piece. Then I use my power punch to make a hole. And the last step is just to go ahead and add the jump ring and the key ring. So I use 2 pairs of pliers and I twist the jump ring open. I don't want to pry it open, I just twist it. And then I add the piece and the key ring, and then I can just twist it back into place, and that way the jump ring doesn't get distorted or bend out of shape. All finished. So this is our Rubber Ducky Daydreams Isopod Keychain. Now I'm thinking of doing a few videos of different kinds of projects that don't have anything to do with stamping. But if you're just here for the stamping, feel free to let me know in the comments or if you'd like to see some variety. Thanks so much for watching. See you soon.